Hey everyone, welcome to JP Tech. Today we're going to be looking at the pre and post delid temperatures on Coffee Lake 8600K and 8700K. If you're interested in how to perform a delid on a Coffee Lake processor, I have a video doing so, and I'll put that in the description below. The hardware used in this video is an NZXT S340 Elite case with Corsair SP120 fans for the rear and top exhaust and Corsair SP140 intake fans. For the air cooling needs in this video, I used the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo, as this is an extremely popular air cooler that comes at an affordable price. For water cooling, I used my probably a few year old Corsair H110. It's a 280 millimeter water cooler, and I mounted that in the front location on the NZXT S340 case. So I want to take the time to note right off the bat that in my testing, I chose to use a custom fan profile, one that I felt struck the balance of noise and performance. So before you guys attack me in the comments, I just want it to be known that my results are probably going to look a little bit different than the tests that you're potentially more familiar with that are using 100% fan speed. I just personally don't think that 100% fan speed is what I'm ever going to use in my system. It just produces too much noise. Some people may be okay with it, but those aren't the results you're going to be seeing in this video. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the initial temperatures before delidding using the Cooler Master 212 Evo along with my custom fan profile. This cooler is using a stock included fan from Cooler Master, and all of these temperatures are normalized to a 22 degrees Celsius, 71.6 degree Fahrenheit room temperature. As you can see, the 8600K stock, this is using 100% full auto settings in the BIOS, which is actually going to give a little bit higher voltage than what is probably necessary for a stock 8600K. And here's the results. The Cinebench temperatures are an average over 5 consecutive runs. A real bench is over 30-minute stress tests, and Battlefield 1 multiplayer is about 30 minutes of gameplay, and all of the temps that you see here are the max observed temperature. So moving on from the stock 8600, we're looking at the 8600K at 5 gigahertz, which I was able to accomplish at 1.328 volts at load. I just want to point out a couple things about the 8600K at 5 gigahertz. The temperatures are fairly high. Again, these are peak temperatures. Majority of the Cinebench 15 runs and real bench stress tests were a decent bit lower than what you're seeing here. This is the absolute highest observed temperature during that test. And Battlefield 1 is also probably about the worst you're going to see temperature-wise while gaming with this processor in this type of configuration. There's a lot of other games you could be playing that will put less load on the CPU, and maybe you'll see like something around 60 degrees Celsius, which even in the 70s is perfectly fine for sustained gaming. But anyways, moving on to the 8700K stock full auto with my particular motherboard, the Asus Z370 Hero is a bit high at 1.28 volts. Highly recommend setting the CPU SVID to best case scenario. That's something I wish I did before I went ahead and did the deleting process, so I could have good before and afters on that, but there's no going back at this point. As you can see, stock at that voltage though, temperatures are getting pretty high. Now, if we look at the 8700K at a more reasonable light overclock of 4.7 gigahertz at 1.248 volts under load, still, I would say that this is really pushing the air cooler without running the fan at max speed. In real bench, the peak temperature was around 91 C, which is getting a bit toasty. That's within 9 degrees Celsius of thermal throttling. And even in Battlefield, we're seeing temperatures approaching 80 degrees Celsius, which again is on the hot side when it comes to gaming. So just to kind of summarize this graph right here, The 8600K stock auto is well within means of this air cooler. 5 gigahertz on the 8600K is something that could probably be pulled off. In my opinion, those temps are a bit high. You could probably get away with something like a 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz overclock with the 8600K with this cooler and that fan profile, no problem. In general, I would almost say the 8700K stock, at least on auto voltage like I have here, that's a little bit higher, and the light overclock of 4.7 gigahertz, both of those are just a little bit too hot in my opinion, at least with the fan speed set to reduce noise. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the results look like after delidding and applying liquid metal. This is again with the Cooler Master 212 Evo. All the temperatures on this chart right here are only the 8600K. In this one you can see I added the stock clocks on the 8600K, but I set the SVID behavior to best case scenario, which you can see lowered the voltage quite a bit. It's at 1.024 volts. So with the relaxed fan profile that I have, you can see the temperatures are very low on a stock 8600K. On the 8600K stock voltage full auto, like we saw on the last slide, liquid metal saved us about 6 degrees on Cinebench, about 8 degrees off the peak in Real Bench, and about 5 degrees off the peak in Battlefield 1 multiplayer. And again, that's just the processor at stock. Now, let's look at the 8600K at 5 gigahertz, again at the 1.238 volts that it was before the delid. On Cinebench 15, we saved about 10 degrees Celsius off the peak. On Real Bench stress test, we saved 13 degrees. And on Battlefield multiplayer, we saved 8 degrees. After the delid, using a stock 212 Evo for a 5 gigahertz 8600K, I think these temps are well within reason. Real Bench is about the worst you're going to see temperature wise under real usage. Like that's going to be it's going to be a little bit higher than what you might get like encoding a video or something else, because Real Bench is using AVX 256 loads, which is what's really stressing and adding heat, and you can even set lower clocks for that in the BIOS if you choose. And as you can see in Battlefield 1, 8600K 5 gigahertz, about 66 degrees Celsius was the peak. I often saw lower temperatures than this, so I think that's pretty good on a $30 air cooler. And what's even better about this is the 8600K at 5.2 gigahertz takes a decent voltage jump up to 1.392 at load, and these temperatures are still 5.7 degrees less than 5 gigahertz before delid, 6.7 degrees less than Real Bench before delid on 5 gigahertz, and 4.7 degrees Celsius less than 5 gigahertz before delid. So even using the fan profile that I used, I was able to get the extra 200 megahertz on the 8600K at the higher voltage and still run cooler than the lower voltage, lower overclock before the delid. One of the themes you're going to notice with using the custom fan profile is I might not be getting up to 20 degrees Celsius that some other people are getting at 100% fan speed, but a trend that you will notice is that you'll be able to crank up the clocks and voltage higher, and in general still have a temperature reduction compared to the lower clock and lower voltage settings before the delid. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the 8700K temperatures. Again, after delid using liquid metal. This is with the Cooler Master 212 Evo, stock fan, custom fan profile. Again, I added the 8700K at best case SVID, and you can see the voltage is a lot lower, and this is also helping the temperature. So I didn't really have much to compare this to, because this was an afterthought, something I did after the delid. The 8700K stock full auto 1.184 volts still return pretty good temperatures in the 60s, nothing breaking over 70. The 8700K at 4.7 gigahertz, 1.24, 8 volts, like we saw before the Delidd. This had a pretty decent amount of temperature savings here. In Cinebench 15, again, this is 5 consecutive runs. The peak temperature dropped about 14 degrees. In Real Bench, the peak temperature dropped about 16 degrees. And in Battlefield 1 multiplayer, it dropped about 12 degrees. So this makes running 4.7 gigahertz with a reasonably quiet $30 air cooler well within reason for the 8700K. Peak temperatures of 75 to me is quite good for this type of a system. And a little bonus that I decided to throw in here just to kind of show what the capabilities of delidding allow for is the bottom temperatures you see here is the 8700K stock with SVID on best case scenario, which is allowing for nice low 1.072 voltage. I was able to use the 212 Evo cooler passively, which is completely without the fan. That's just the radiator or heatsink, if you will. And the peak temperature I saw in Real Bench was 69 degrees Celsius. You know, it's not very likely that you're going to get an 8700K and choose to not overclock it, because that kind of defeats the purpose of getting the K model. But if you were to pick, you know, something like the 8700 and you wanted to do like a very quiet system, this puts it well within reason. Post-delid temps not reaching over 70 C at a average room temperature of about 72 Fahrenheit. I was very impressed that I was able to take the fan off the cooler, so I thought I'd share that with you guys. And on a side note too, the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo is not even advertised as a cooler that should be used passively. So to be able to pull this off with a Coffee Lake processor that is known to run hot just really shows the capabilities that you gain from delidding and adding liquid metal to your processor. So now that we've looked at all the temperatures from the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo, we're going to make way to using the Corsair H110. Now this is a liquid cooler that uses a 280 millimeter radiator, and I've had this for a few years, so chances are it's not quite performing like a new 280 millimeter AIO would, but nonetheless it still provided some pretty good results. So looking at the 8600K stock auto 1.136 volts, just like we used on the 212 Evo, temperatures again are low. This is a common theme with the 8600K. It runs cooler than the 8700K, and with either of the coolers, the 212 Evo or the H110, you have nothing to worry about with a stock 8600K. Moving to the 8600K at 5 gigahertz, 1.328 volts again. If you're doing water cooling based on these temperatures, you're not going to need to delid necessarily. You know, there's certainly something to gain from delidding, but I don't think that 8600K at 5 gigahertz, at least if you're at the voltage that I was able to get mine overclocked to, which a lot of people are capable of doing with those chips, I don't think there's necessarily a need to delid. Moving on to the 8700K stock auto, which is kind of worst case for the stock, you can see the temperatures actually slightly surpass for the most part, or at least kind of match the 8600K at 5 gigahertz. This is slightly unfair because that voltage is a little bit higher than what is necessary. And that's kind of reflected when we look at the 8700K at 4.7 gigahertz at a lower 1.248 volts under load. You can see that even with the all-core 4.7 gigahertz overclock, the temperatures are almost identical to the stock full auto 8700K. And at least with my processor, and I think a lot of the 8700Ks are this way, I think the sweet spot for performance to voltage ratio and temperatures too, I think 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz is about where you want to be. You know, yeah, you can get 5 gigahertz and beyond, but I think dialing it back the extra couple 100 megahertz is just going to give you the best case scenario: better temperatures, lower voltage, longer CPU life. Now we're taking a look at the 8600K temperatures after applying the liquid metal using the Corsair H110 again. 8600K stock auto voltage got us 1.2 volts, nothing higher than about 61 Celsius. 8600K 5 gigahertz at 1.328 volts got us a roughly 10 Celsius less in both Cinebench and RealBench, and roughly 7 degrees Celsius less in Battlefield 1. Now, something that's worth noting here is I didn't take any sound measurements, but because of the fan profile I'm using, the temperature differences aren't quite as big as they could be if the fans were on 100%, but you're saving even more on noise. So you save about that 10 degrees Celsius, but you're also keeping the fans at a lower RPM because of the profile I'm using. And again, the big advantage here of delidding is the overclocks that you can get that weren't even feasible before. So even with a quiet fan profile, 8600K, I was able to hit 5.3 gigahertz, very stable. I ran this for a couple months, 1.392 volts, and the max temperature in RealBench was about 82 C. And realistically, that's about the peak temperature I want to see on my overclock system. You know, of course, lower is better, but I think that that's a very reasonable peak temperature, and it's not something you're often staying at. And, you know, that's still 18 degrees Celsius away from throttling. So I'm okay with that. And I'm not trying to use this processor for 10 years. And you can also see that there's, because of the 8600K being at 5.3 gigahertz, it actually keeps Battlefield 1 at a little bit more reasonable temperatures. There's not much difference between 5 gigahertz at a lower voltage versus 5.3 at a higher voltage. And that's likely because of the extra performance gained on the processor. So, you know, it's roughly doing around the same work, but the 8600K at the higher clocks can do more work. I think it's worth noting again the sweet spot for the processor. On the 8600K, I found that to be around 5 gigahertz. The voltage is able to be kept into a reasonable range under load, and with the H110 and the delid procedure, you know, temperatures aren't going above about 67 Celsius in the worst case stress test. And I think that's wonderful. Now, if you look at what it takes to have the same setup hit 5.3 gigahertz, you're looking at pretty decent temperature increases. You know, it's like 13 degrees in Cinebench and about 15 degrees in RealBench. And Battlefield 1 is about the only thing that stays roughly the same. But the good news here is if you want to do 5.3 gigahertz and your chip is capable of hitting it like mine was at this voltage, the Delid and the H110 make this a reasonable feat. Alright, I know this video is getting a little long at this point, but here we are on the last graph. 8700K temperatures with liquid metal, Corsair H110. Stock, full automatic, we saved about 11 degrees Celsius in Cinebench, 15 degrees in RealBench, and only 3 degrees in Battlefield 1. Moving along to the 8700K of 4.7 gigahertz at 1.248 volts, we saved about 10.5 degrees Celsius in Cinebench 15, about 11.5 degrees in RealBench, and 4.4 Celsius in Battlefield 1. Now, the interesting part was the increased capabilities. Again, the fan profile is kind of creating a different variable here, but I like looking at this because, you know, this is having a system that's just not bonkers loud because the fans are not set at 100%. With that being said, 8700K was able to hit 5 gigahertz. Mine took a whole 1.408 volts under load to hit the 5 gigahertz. Some people are able to do it a little bit less, but this is what my chip took. At those settings, I was able to get a peak temperature in RealBench of no more than 82 degrees Celsius, which relatively on the high side, but I consider that a safe peak temperature. And if you look, Battlefield 1 temperatures are very reasonably at 55 56 degrees Celsius. Very commonly, if I'm encoding a video or something, I'll see like high 70s, maybe 80 degrees Celsius, and I'm good with that for the most part. Well, that's the end of the temperature data that I have for you guys. I hope you appreciated a look at the before and after results using both an air cooler and a water cooler on a custom fan profile, not using the fans at 100%. As you can see, the common theme here is that an 8600K runs cooler than an 8700K by quite a bit, actually. And in a lot of cases, the delidding allowed for higher overclocks at yet lower temperatures. And I think that if you're overclocking your coffee lake, in most instances, I think there's a lot to gain from delidding, and I highly suggest it. The one thing that's kind of contrary to that is the 8600K. In my case, with a water cooler and AIO, I was able to hit 5 gigahertz at very reasonable temperatures, and in that situation, I wouldn't say that using the liquid metal is like a requirement, but there's still something to gain from that. But absolutely, if you have an 8700K and you're trying to overclock, especially if you want to use air, I highly recommend delidding. And especially if you want to take either of these chips and push them to the max, delidding is basically a requirement. I know with the 8700K I hit 4.9 gigahertz, and I was using the H110, and I was actually thermal throttling very often. So not only did delidding move me, almost 20 degrees off of thermal throttle, but also allowed me to get that extra 100 megahertz that I wasn't able to hit before that. So again, thanks for watching, guys. Come back for more JP Tech, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. And if you can, hit that subscribe button, hit that like video if you like it, and give me a thumbs down if you didn't like it. See you guys.